Welcome, everyone. My name is Sopadro Dasi, and I'm going to be one of your hosts here in Ashram Talks. I'm joining you from Colombia. For those of you who don't know, Ashram Talks is an international initiative that brings together people from around the world who are interested in exploring the Vedas, which are one of the main sources of spiritual knowledge coming from India, deepen in their spiritual understanding and learning more about the Bhagavad Gita, which is the text we're going to go through around this series of episodes, and of course, other ancient spiritual texts that continue to inspire to this day. As a kind reminder, we'll be hosting these classes twice a week, Mondays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern and Thursdays at 8 a.m. Each week will feature a different speaker, so be sure to join us for thoughtful conversations on a variety of spiritual topics. I'd also love to invite you to follow us on Instagram at Ashram Talks English. And if you ever miss a live session, you can always catch the recordings anytime on your YouTube channel with the same name. Today we're joined by Simon Haas. He's joining us from Costa Rica. Simon is an internationally renowned author and teacher of yoga philosophy, specializing in applying ancient wisdom to modern life. He began studying the sacred yoga texts of India at the age of 13 and spent 10 years living in temples and monasteries in India. He studied for 16 years also with an elderly master practitioner of the Bhakti tradition, which is the devotion yoga tradition. Simon is also the author of the Book of Dharma and Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul, and he has taught in 14 countries, including at the United Nations. He's a graduate of Cambridge and he holds a master's in comparative religion from Oxford and is currently completing doctoral studies in the Bhakti tradition. So, Simon, welcome. We're really happy to have you here today with us.
Thank you so much, Subhadra Dasi. I'm so excited to be here. The Bhagavad Gita is probably my favorite text. So to have the opportunity to study this text in a small, intimate study group is just a real privilege. Today,
As we heard, you have a lot of experience, right? And I'm sure that our audience is looking forward to hearing from you. And I'm sure realizations will be of benefit for all of us. So the stage is all yours, Simon. Thank you so much.
thank you, Subhadra. So today we'll be looking at the first verse of the Gita, but before launching straight into the first verse, I thought we would cover first a little introduction on the Bhagavad Gita as a yoga classic. Now, in the tradition in India, is to begin with what's known as a Mangalacharana, which is an auspicious invocation. And so it's a Sanskrit prayer. And this one is directed to the teachers, the sacred teachers in our lineage. He Shri Guru Jnana Dina Bandho Swananda Datta Karunaika Sindho Brindavanasi Nahitavatara Prasiddha Radha Pranaya Prachara. So in a future session, we'll look at the meaning of that. But we have a lot to cover in this particular session on the opening verse of the Bhagavad Gita. So the Gita is a classic, a yoga classic. And I think many are familiar with the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is also a very well-known classic. Now, the Yoga Sutras were actually written for ascetics, that is, people who disengage from everyday life. And in a sense, this is where the Bhagavad Gita stands out, because the Gita is a yoga text that is specially meant for those who are in active engagement with the world. So it's very much about action. You see that in the very first verse of the Gita, which we'll look at in a few moments. It says, Kim Makurvata, what did they do or how did they act? So sometimes classes or study groups or presentations on the Gita can be quite intellectual or philosophical, but really the text is actually very much about how to act, how to live effectively in everyday life. And that's something that we very much want to emphasize and focus on. So the text has 18 chapters, and each is a different system of yoga and has a particular name. So the very first chapter of the Gita is known as Vishad Yoga or Arjuna Vishad Yoga, which means the yoga of crisis. It has another title also, sometimes. Sometimes it's referred to as Sainya Darshanam, or observing the armies, but also Vishad Yoga. And then subsequent chapters each have the name of a particular yoga. So you have Karma Yoga, which is the yoga of action or the yoga of work. You have Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge. Of course, Bhakti Yoga, many different systems of yoga. And so look out also throughout different parts of the Gita. Krishna, the speaker of the Gita, will give different definitions of yoga. So, for example, one definition we'll come across is Siddhya Siddhyo Samo Bhutva Samatvam Yoga Uchyate. So, Samaha means to be equal in success and failure, to not be not be disturbed in mind by the vicissitudes of life, but samatvam yoga uchyate. That sameness or that equanimity is known as yoga. So Krishna gives various definitions of yoga in the text as he moves through the teachings of the Gita. Now, something quickly on the setting of the Gita. Usually a yoga text, we find that it's spoken in a very beautiful setting, idyllic setting, like maybe perhaps on the bank of a river, or in the mountains or in the forest. But we find in the Bhagavad Gita, the setting is very unusual. This conversation between Krishna and the warrior Arjuna takes place in the middle of a battlefield, right at the onset of war. And we'll see this as we go through the verses of chapter 1. So that's a very surprising setting that immediately stands out. Now, as a yoga text, the Gita has different, you can say, dimensions. So some of the commentators in our Bhakti tradition, such as Madhvacharya, they explain some of the different levels of meaning. So you have like a historical dimension, an ethical dimension, a symbolic dimension. So Sri Madhva, he explains the symbolic dimension of the Gita. And the various individuals who are mentioned, they each also represent something. So this particular battlefield dialogue takes place in a location known as Kurukshetra. And when we turn to the verse in a moment, you'll see the word Kurukshetra in the opening verse of the Gita. Now, Kshetra means field, and Kuru comes from the verbal root Kri, which means to do. So it's the field of action, the field of doing. In that sense, we can think of Kurukshetra not just as a historical, not simply as a geographical and historical place in India, which it is, and you can go and visit that place. It's north of Delhi. But it's also the field of action, the field of now. So in that sense, we are all, like Arjuna, at Kurukshetra, in the field of action. And that field of action can be very much like a battlefield. We know that from experience in our life. It can be frenetic, chaotic, unexpected changes in fortunes. And so it can sometimes be very much like a battlefield. So how to make the field of action a sacred place, that essentially is the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. So takes place only in one particular location. In the whole universe, there's only one place where any and all action will take place. And that's the present moment, the here and now. Any action we took in the past, we took it when it was the present. Any action we'll take in the future, it'll be the present when we actually take that action. So the field of action is the field of now, and how to make that field of now a sacred place, even in the midst of great chaos and confusion and crisis. Now, when everything's going well in our life, we can feel very wise. It's when we are faced with difficulty, then our knowledge is tested, and we may not be as wise as we might imagine ourselves to be. When we a breakup in a relationship, when we lose our work, lose our job, maybe we face bankruptcy, we face illness. It's in these times of crisis or difficulty that our yoga practice is tested. But it's also exactly the kind of situation that is intended for our yoga practice. Our yoga practice is tested and deepened in moments of challenge and difficulty. I suppose it's a little bit like if you're flying an airplane. As a pilot, you're not tested, your skill is not tested or deepened in blue skies or when you're flying on autopilot. It's when there's some difficulty, your instruments aren't quite functioning, one of your engines isn't working, you're going through a storm. That's when, as a pilot, you really gain your experience as a pilot, and your abilities are deepened and tested. So yoga in the contemporary West, it's something that has become embedded in the wellness industry. So there's not very much to prepare us for personal crisis or for times of challenge and difficulty. We may even feel facing these kinds of situations in our life that perhaps our yoga practice let us down. But the Bhagavad Gita teaches us that yoga is especially meant for those kinds of situations. And it provides a really valuable tool set for approaching life in the best way and for navigating these kinds of situations. So the Gita teaches us what's known as continuous practice. Yoga is no longer something that's restricted to the yoga mat or to the yoga studio, but rather it becomes something that we apply throughout our life, every day. You can say that our perceptual world, you can say the field of now, Kurukshetra, the field of now becomes our yoga studio. So let's turn to the first verse of the Gita, and we'll take a look at the Sanskrit there to begin with. So Dhritarashtra uvacha dharma kshetre kurukshetre samaveta yuyutsavaha mamaka pandavashchaiva kim kurvata sanjaya. So, as mentioned, the Gita is a battlefield conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. Arjuna is a great bowman, a warrior, and his best friend and charioteer is Krishna. We'll see that Krishna's identity is later in the Gita. We'll see that Krishna is is not an ordinary charioteer, and he will reveal his identity later in the text. Arjuna and Krishna are close friends. Krishna is his charioteer, and in Arjuna's own personal crisis, he turns to Krishna and asks him to teach him the yoga wisdom of the Gita. Now, we see, however, that the Bhagavad Gita begins with an opening verse not by Arjuna, but by Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra is a blind emperor. And in fact, the whole What at Kurukshetra you can say happens because of Dhritarashtra. He had so many opportunities to stop this war, and so many efforts were made to broker peace with him, but they were unsuccessful. So ultimately, this battlefield is taking place because of Dhritarashtra and his ambitions and his clinging to power. So, but Dhritarashtra is not present at Kurukshetra. As a blind emperor, elderly, he's in his capital city of Hastinapur, which is present-day Delhi. He's in his palace, and his own charioteer and minister Sanjaya is there with him. And in this, you can say the emptiness of his palace, because all the warriors have left, they're all at Kurukshetra. He turns to Sanjaya, and you can see in the Sanskrit there's immense fear, lamentation, and confusion in his words. He asks, at the place of Dharma, known as Kurukshetra, all the armies had assembled, desiring to fight. What did my sons and the sons of Pandu do? What did they do? He's asking. So, interestingly, and in the Gita, Arjuna is the paradigmatic student. He's the model student. And the teachings of India are not intended to give us information. Actually, they're designed to lead to personal transformation. So you see in the Gita, by the end of the Gita, the beginning, Arjuna is in a state of personal crisis and confusion. By the end of the Gita, Arjuna is transformed. And he comes into his own power on the field of action, the field of now. Now, Dhritarashtra hears exactly the same Bhagavad Gita as Arjuna. And just like Arjuna, who hears the Gita from his own charioteer, Dhritarashtra hears the Bhagavad Gita from his charioteer, which is Sanjaya, the same Gita. But Dhritarashtra remains unchanged. He remains exactly as he was before. So he represents whilst Arjuna represents the model student, Dhritarashtra represents how we should not approach the yoga teachings of India, the teachings of the Gita in particular here. Dhritarashtra, he's filled with fear, attachment, illusory ego. He's speaking in terms of, he's worried, very concerned about the outcome of this battle, because that will determine his own, the future of his lineage. He's speaking, you see, there's one telling part of that verse, Mamaka Pandavaschaiva, my sons and the sons of Pandu. He's dividing, creating a division here between his own sons and the sons of his brother Pandu. Now, for those who are familiar with the narrative of the Mahabharata, in which the Bhagavad Gita is found, Pandu, the name Pandu means the pale one. Pandu passed away when his own children, who were known as the Pandavas, his own 5 sons, were only young boys in the forest. They were in a distant place. Pandu passed away. The young boys, his sons, were taken to his Hastinapur, and they lived under the care and tutelage of the emperor Dhritarashtra. And they saw him as their father. They revered him and considered him to be just like their own father Pandu. So that's why it's very surprising in this opening verse for Dhritarashtra to say, my sons and the sons of Pandu, to make that emphasis of that dividing emphasis. Now, those of you who are familiar with perhaps Hindi or the culture of India, you might come across in India, people saying cousin brother. They'll say cousin brother. And for someone who's not familiar, they'll wonder, well, what does that mean? Does it mean cousin? Does it mean brother? It's because in India, traditionally, cousins are regarded just like brothers. So the Pandavas, the 5 sons of Pandu, which includes Arjuna, they are just like brothers to the sons of Dhritarashtra, the sons and daughter of Dhritarashtra. So Dhritarashtra, he's here speaking in terms of I and mine, and he's basically expressing his story. So we're all storytellers. We are the lead character in our own life story, and we believe our story without question. We're prepared to fight for our story, to lose friends for our story. And if someone supports us in our story, we think, they're our friends. If someone undermines our story, we see them as our competitors. We forget that this is just a story, a product of the mind. Most of our story actually is inherited. We've accepted it from our parents, from the media, from friends, and we carry that story around with us wherever we go, and we live from it. Now, in India, in the sacred texts of India, there's a name for the lead character of that story. The lead character is known as Ahamkara, which means the eye maker. So that's very significant because the sages of India, the rishis, they understood that lead character in the story is not who we actually truly are. It's that lead character is really a figment of the mind. But we become so lost in our story, we take it so seriously that we identify with the lead character, and then we experience suffering related to time, fear, lamentation, and confusion. Fear is suffering associated with the future, lamentation with the past, and confusion with the present. So why does the Bhagavad Gita begin with Dhritarashtra and his story? Why? Because it's the dominant way that we approach life. And so that the Gita begins with that because it's generally the way of living life that we're most familiar with. And there's an irony in Dhritarashtra's question. The irony is he's asking, what happened? Sanjaya, tell me what happened at the battlefield of Kurukshetra. But the reader in the Mahabharata knows that by this stage, Dhritarashtra's army has already more or less lost because Bhishma, the commander, has fallen. So you'll see in the next few verses of the Gita, you'll see Dhritarashtra's son Duryodhana will say, protect Bhishma, he's our commander, he's practically immortal, protect him, he's the greatest fighter that ever lived. And surely we're going to be victorious in this battle if we all support Bhishma. But the reader knows by this stage that Bhishma has already fallen, because in the Mahabharata, it goes through the battle, and on a particular day of the battle, Bhishma falls, and Sanjaya rushes back to Hastinapur to tell the news to Dhritarashtra. And he comes in, Dhritarashtra calls him, and then asks him, Dharma kshetre kurukshetre samaveta yayutsa. What happened? And then Sanjaya tells the story of what happened on the battlefield and how Krishna relates the Gita, speaks the yoga teachings of the Gita to Arjuna, and then also explains after that what happens on that battlefield up to the fall of Bhishma and beyond. So there's an irony in the question. The inner teachings are that if we approach our life with this particular mindset that's encapsulated by the words of Dhritarashtra, that's entirely immersed in our small human narrative, and that is based on fear, lamentation, and confusion, then the outcome is already determined. It's just a matter of time. It's simply a matter of time separating that outcome. Um, an outcome of defeat is already put in place by the very state of consciousness or a state of mind with which we're approaching life. So that's a summary of the first verse of the Gita. And I'm very excited about these Bhagavad Gita sessions. It's really an opportunity to dive into the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita in depth. So I'm very grateful to Subhadra and to the team at Ashram Talks for kindly inviting me to be part of this.
Thank you so much, Prabhu, for this enlightening lecture. Well, we have a question here. It says, so the Bhagavad Gita is being narrated as all the events happen, or is it a narration of the past? Like, is
Uh-huh.
it occurring at the same time, or did he see all the events and then he's telling these events to the king?
That's a very good question. The beginning of what Sanjaya is explaining is he's narrating events that have happened already. But then at one particular point, once he covers that, then he's narrating them as it happens. But up to the death of Bhishma, he's narrating something that has already occurred.
Okay, thank you so much. Interesting. I didn't know that particularly, and I've always wondered
Uh-huh.
if Sanjay was actually narrating something that had happened or if he was seeing it at the same time.
He has the power to be able to see everything that's occurring on the battlefield, including, it says in the Mahabharata, the minds. He's able to enter into the minds by his he's able to enter into the minds of the participants. But the beginning part, when you read it we often read the Bhagavad Gita as a standalone text, so we don't know what happens before and after in the larger Mahabharata. Um, but what happens is that Bhishma has already fallen, and Sanjaya is basically telling Dhritarashtra, catching him up on everything that has happened, and then begins to say, through his divine vision, explain what happens afterwards.
Okay. Thank you so much for that answer and also for this grounding introduction in the Bhagavad Gita. I think it's important to highlight how at the beginning you presented it not as an abstract text with a lot of philosophy and no more, but as kind of a handbook for our daily lives. Like each of us faces our own battlefields in so many ways, like stress at work, family conflicts, and all that you mentioned before. So the same guidance that Arjun is going to receive can actually be applied to our daily lives. And I think that was really amazing that you presented it that way because it's like the whole point of listening to all of this. If we don't apply it in our lives, then
Right,
what is the point?
right. But very well expressed, Subhaja. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Simon. I don't know if you have any final comments or anything else you would like to share with our audience.
Well, please come and please join us on this journey through the Bhagavad Gita. We have speakers from different communities and different countries twice a week, and we'll be covering each. We'll be covering one verse at a time or a small kind of group of verses that go together every time, and we'll hopefully make our way through chapter 1 and then move on to the next chapter, chapter 2, and so on, making our way through each of these 18 systems of yoga. These systems
Thank
of
you so
yoga,
much. Yeah.
these systems of yoga are very powerful, and have the once we, as you mentioned, once we apply them in our life, we see immediate difference in the way we in our thoughts, our words, and our actions.
Well, after this invitation, I'm sure that we're all looking forward to what's coming next in this study of the Bhagavad Gita. And well, if you all find some inspiration from this session today, please like and subscribe to be notified about more classes like this one. And you can also follow us on Instagram at Ashram Talks English. So see you this Monday at 7:30 p.m. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Simon, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.